I've heard it's not the size of the filter, it's how you use it. Is that true, Alexis?
Actually, no. I think size matters when it comes to filtration. So when it comes to filtration, there are 3 key factors: the capacity of the filter, the type of filter, and absolutely the pore size. So size definitely does matter.
All filtration system effectiveness is determined by pore size. And by this, I mean, people use analogies. I think this is a pretty good one, to think of like a chain link fence or something that's visually grossly observable, macroscopically observable. You can see it with the naked eye. And imagine things trying to fit through that, right? You can think of a chain link fence as being small enough, the pores being small enough to stop a tennis ball. Or if that's in doubt, they're definitely small enough to stop a soccer ball, right? Or chicken wire fence, which has, maybe about 1 inch diameter pores. That'll definitely be small enough to stop a tennis ball. Well, mechanically, a lot of those same principles scale down. When you get really small sizes, down to the micron or submicron, then electrostatic forces play a much larger role, and that's counterintuitive. But still, for what we're talking about today, mechanical rules still apply. So to screen out bacteria that are a certain size, you have to have pores that are smaller than those bacteria, so the bacteria get clogged up in the filter and they don't pass through. And that same principle works for parasites, protozoans, worms, eggs of different kinds. It works for viruses. It works for everything in the micron and nanometer level. So what are some common sizes of things that maybe you want to get out of your drinking water, and therefore that you have to consider for filtration? I'm looking at a couple of examples here. E. coli is probably your standard. That's Escherichia coli, and that causes traveler's diarrhea, which is basically a watery diarrhea you can get. And it can cause some other worse stuff depending on the strain. But E. coli is something you want to filter out, and that's 2 microns, right? And a micron is 1 times 10 to the negative 6, so it's 1/1,000,000th of a meter, right? Micrometer. So 2 microns is how small you have to have it for E. coli. With a lot of parasites, such as giardia, you don't actually need pores that are that small. You can get away with having ones that are about 5 or 10 microns wide, because giardia is about 20 by 10 by 2 microns. The 2 micron dimension is the flat part of the trophozoite. Microsporidium is another one to think about. That's a parasite, and that's also about 2 microns in diameter. But really, if you're talking about filtration systems that will filter out every microorganism you can get, you want to have something that's got really even smaller pore sizes, because there are a couple of viruses there. I'm thinking specifically of norovirus that are only 0.023 to 0.045 microns, give or take, of the capsid size. So when looking for a filtration system that will remove all microorganisms from water supplies that can cause waterborne diarrheal illnesses, you want to find a filtration system that can filter out all parasites, protozoan or helminth, bacteria, and viruses. And you need one that has a pore size of 0.02 microns or smaller.
I didn't even know they had filters that small. I thought that the smallest pore size that could be filtered was 0.2 microns.
Yeah, well, filter technology has been getting better and better over time. When I was going through microbiology, the filters that were available were, I think, about 0.2 microns, and I think the economical ones were only about 2 or 3 microns. So you could filter out most parasites and bacteria, but now they've gotten even smaller, so you can more reliably get even the smaller bacteria, and you can also get viruses. The filtration systems, the matrices they're using for the filters, the substrates, the technology's been getting better. I don't know the ins and outs of it or the details, but they're able to produce filters that have reliable pore sizes that are 0.02 microns. To be able to get all waterborne illnesses that can cause diarrhea out of water just with a filtration system is very important.
Yeah.
Right? So, but there is a trade-off. There are limitations still. The general trade-off in each filtration system is between the integrity of the filter membrane and the pore size. What do I mean by that? Well, to go back to the chain link fence example, when you think about chain link fences, they're pretty durable, right? But imagine the chain link fence, instead of being made out of steel, metal, whatever exactly it's made out of. Let's say it's made out of some sort of rubbery plastic or something. And every time you try to pass balls through it, that stretches the plastic. That's kind of a rough analogy for what trying to pass through particulate matter through a filter does, right? It clogs up the filter, and it causes the substrate of the filter to pull apart a little bit. It imparts various tension and shear stresses on the matrix or on the substrate of the filter itself, right? So filters degrade over time, and so the smaller pore size you have, generally speaking, the trade-off you're going to have to make is your filter goes sooner, right? Whereas if you have a larger pore size and more matter is passing through, and therefore the filter is less effective, the filter will be more durable. You can make it out of stronger materials, and it'll last longer. For this reason, I think it's a good idea to consider using a multi-stage or at least a two-stage filtration system, whether that's integrated within the same filter unit or you have a couple of different filters and you do kind of a step-down process. And the reason for that is if you take a bunch of really dirty, muddy water and you pass it right through a very fine filter that, let's say, has pores that are only 0.02 microns, you're going to jam all that particulate matter through. It's going to clog everything up. First of all, you might not even be able to pass it all through the filter. And second of all, if you're able to pass it through by putting a lot of pressure on it, there's a good chance you're going to break the substrate of the filter, rendering your filter ineffective anyway. So why'd you go to all that trouble? That's like trying to drive a car through maybe like a rubber bandy chain link fence.
Yeah.
You could do it, but what was the point of having it in the first place?
And I imagine that these finer filters are more expensive, so it probably is economical to kind of siphon down.
Right. So some protocols will call that a pre-filtration step. I like to look at it in terms of stages: first, a second, a third stage filtration. The easiest thing you can do with whatever filter you're using, and we covered this in one of our previous videos, but it bears repeating now, is pre-filter or do a first stage filtration just through a washcloth, bandana, chamois, shamag, whatever, anything you have laying around, scrap of denim, that will pass water through and get most of the bulk particulate matter out. Mm-hmm. You always want to do that. There's really no reason not to. Obviously, if you have water like that, if you have optically completely clear water with no turbidity, maybe you don't have to do that. But it's probably still good practice. And the second stage that you can do is after you've filtered out that water, if there's any remaining turbidity left or anything like that, or even if it's completely optically clear, there are probably still some microscopic particles that are 10, 20, 60, 100 microns. Maybe you can't see them, but they're in there, and they can clog up and damage a very fine filter. So it's a good idea to have a second stage there as well, to get just to remove some of the larger microscopic particles. And then the third or the last stage of maybe a 3-stage setup, and you can do this in a lot of different ways. You can do 2 or 4 or 5 stages. But the third stage you might consider is running it then finally through, after it's been filtered through those first 2 stages, running through the third stage and getting at all basically the parasites, the bacteria, and the viruses that are left. Right? So there are a lot of different types of filters to think about. There are physical mechanical filters, there are electrostatic filters, there are osmotic filters, there are some chemical exchange and gradient filters. For this talk, we're mostly going to talk about the physical filters, especially when thinking about microorganisms. Now, this filtration system really caught my eye. Okay, it's made by a company called LifeStraw. This particular model is a LifeStraw family 1.0, and it's, I guess, made by a company called, so it's made by a company called Vestergaard, and the product's called LifeStraw. Okay, this stuff, it's actually really cool. There are some philanthropic organizations, including I think the company itself, that disperse these to countries that don't have very good sanitation, a lot of sub-Saharan Africa. These are pretty effective. I've read all the reviews on them. I've also read directly some of the independent reports they have on these. So basically, I think the University of Arizona did a study. LifeStraw or Vestergaard, they post the results on their website, and I corroborated it by looking through PubMed and making sure they were all accurate. But I read some of the papers, and the papers did some really good studies. They looked at there are basically 2 ways to study it. One is to pass through water through the filter and check the size of bubbles of non-miscible or immiscible liquids, to look at the bubble size. And you can measure the bubble size, and if the bubble size is consistently 0.02 microns or smaller, then whatever's passing through is exactly that size. Kind of like if you took a big block of soft cheese and you ran it through a chain link fence. That's kind of what the study does. And then you measure the size of the cheese that comes through. So that was one set of studies they did. They also did direct studies by taking known concentrations or known parasite infested or bacteria infested and virus infested water, passing through the filter, and then determining that none of those things are present. So it's been independently studied and verified. I like the independent studies. This is what I'm using currently. This is part of my kit for water filtration and prepping. What I also like about it, we've been talking so much so far about type of filter and pore size, but it's also got a pretty massive capacity. It's got a 4,755 gallon capacity for each filter, as long as you keep it dry and well maintained and clean the filter by flushing water through it. It's in the instructions. But it should last 4,755 gallons, which is pretty cool. Yeah. It's got 0.02 microns. According to the studies, it'll get log 9 parasites. That is, it'll get, let's see, if you go out to 9 digits, so that'd be only 1 in a billion parasites will get through.
Yeah.
And then it gets log 5 viruses, which means only 1 out of 100,000 virus particles will get through. And for those of you who are concerned about the lingering 1 out of 100,000 or 1 out of a billion, keep in mind there's a certain minimum threshold that's been determined for most microorganisms to cause infection. The most notorious one is salmonella, that requires 200 organisms, but most other infections require at least a couple thousand to tens of thousands of organisms to cause infections. So if only 1 out of a billion or 1 out of 100,000 are getting through, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is that accumulating over time? So if you're using the life straw over the course of, let's say, 3 weeks, then that 1 out of 100,000 over time can accumulate to cause disease? Or do a lot of these viruses die, or do a lot of these viruses die off before they can accumulate to that critical mass?
I'll be honest, I'm not really sure of the answer to that question, because I don't think that particular thing has been studied.
Okay.
So as a true scientist often says, I don't know. Or to put it in a more scientific way, it's pending further empirical observation and testing.
Oh, okay. I don't know, but I would think that perhaps viruses without a host die off after some period of time. So maybe you have not that critical mass of...
The general period is 2 weeks, yeah. I'm not sure... Yeah, I'm not sure how relevant that is, honestly.
No, it's okay.
So this family model, it gets the bugs, right? Mm-hmm. Lifestraw has some other brands that I'm personally less interested in. They've got a pretty neat suite of things, and others of them focus on getting rid of heavy metals or getting rid of some combination of bugs and chemicals and heavy metals. But all those filters had pretty significant limitations, and they wouldn't get rid of viruses. This one will cover viruses.
Yeah.
And all the smaller bacteria and smaller parasites that are about 2 microns in size. So this is my go-to. Right, but they do have a couple others. In fact, I think they have some that'll get rid of heavy metals. So you were looking around at some other models that LifeStraw has, and I wasn't too impressed with them because they didn't get rid of the bugs. But they do have some that'll get rid of heavy metals, it seems.
Yeah, probably as an adjunct to the LifeStraw, they would filter out contaminants that are a little bit smaller than what this filter can get. So heavy metals specifically, as well as chlorine. And I believe it can also sometimes desalinate the water. But they have an activated carbon and positive ion filter, or a cation filter exchange. So the activated carbon has gone through a specific process that treats the carbon so that there are millions of pores created between the atoms. And it works to filter via absorption, because contaminants will actually get stuck in those pores and adhere to the surface of the carbon and not continue through the filter. So the water on the other side is clear of those contaminants. And then the cation is like a resin of cations on the filter. They're harmless.
Which are positively charged ions.
Positively charged ions. A lot of heavy metals are also positively charged, so they will actually exchange when they go through the filter. So the harmful contaminants will get stuck on the resin, and the non-harmful ions will enter the solution, making the final product a little bit cleaner for drinking.
Sure, and I guess that's for people who are interested in getting rid of heavy metals. And I'm thinking about analogies for this that might work. So it sounds like for the first one, the activated charcoal or the activated carbon filter systems, the pores are pretty wide. That's why they don't stop parasites or especially viruses and small bacteria. They're very wide, but they work on heavy metals because basically there's let's say glue stuck to the sides, and the ions are all bouncing around, and they eventually hit one of the walls on their way through the filter, and they get stuck.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of what probably a good metaphor or analogy for the activated carbon filters. And then for the cation exchange, let's say there's a bunch of people with red shirts going through, but there's like, let's say 100, but then there's like 10,000 people with blue shirts, right? And those 10,000 people with blue shirts are on a mission to change places with the red shirt people, right? Running through the crowd. And so all those red shirts go in, and then they're grabbed by the blue shirt people, and then the blue shirt people run through.
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. Yeah,
right? That's kind of how a cation exchange filter works.
Yeah.
Very cool. I really don't care too much, especially in an SHTF situation, about heavy metal exposure or removing heavy metals. I'm not really one of those people.
Is it because there are already such trace amounts of them in our drinking water that over a short period of time exposure is not concerning to you?
Yeah, that's basically it. Most public sanitation systems have already removed a lot of that stuff. Even if you have backed up sewage or other problems or failure of infrastructure, I don't think the first big problem is going to be heavy metals. Yeah. If you're drawing from a water source that has a bunch of, I don't know, big barrels of industrial waste in it, okay, yeah, maybe ion exchange maybe heavy metals would be a problem. But I think the much bigger concern is parasites, and that's why I'm happy to look at the Lystra family 1.0.
Yeah.
And I really don't care about the rest of their filters.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, we don't even have the activated carbon cation exchange filter.
Yeah,
I would like
the heavy
to get
metal
it.
stuff.
Yeah, I think we should get it. But
all right, well, you can go buy it.
I will.
Okay.
All right.
What I also wanted to bring to mind, so this is really good for keeping around the house, and it's got high volume capacity. I mean, really, 4,755 gallons of capacity. That'll keep you going for a long time. 4 people at a gallon a day, you're at 3 years.
Yeah, that's really good.
So
yeah,
just with one of these, right? And I like to have duplicates because they say out in the field, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So let's say I lose this, I misplace it, or whatever, something happens,
it's
it breaks.
faulty for some reason.
Yeah. Then at least I got a couple more sitting around. So I love having these. I've given them as gifts to family. My family really doesn't like me.
You're not the best gift giver.
But I think they're great. But for field use.